What's up, everybody? How we doing? DT here, one of the co-hosts of the Bags Bodega sessions. I've got Ignacio, my co-founder, my brother, my friend, on today's session. Thank you for joining me, dude. I'm really excited for this.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. I'm really excited too. It's always fun to talk to you, regardless of whether we're on camera or not. And so we'll see how this goes.
100%, man. Well, I'll start here. Introduce yourself. Where you from? Actually, let's do where you from and what you do at Bags. Let's start there.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Ignacio. I'm one of the co-founders at Bags. I was born and raised in Quito, Ecuador, but I was lucky enough to study in the States, where I met Dan at Brown. At Bags, I do a little bit of everything. I think the title is head of product, but that means diving into data, engineering, design, strategy, and figuring out how we can create the best experience for our customers. Because I think one thing that we share at Bags is that our product isn't just the software, isn't just the stuff on the screen. It's really the whole experience for our users, for our customers, for the businesses we work with. So that's what I spend most of my time thinking about.
And prior to Bags, and he's not kidding when he says he's spending all of his time thinking about how to make our user experience better. But this isn't your first trial in fintech, right? You were at Monzo prior. Talk a little bit about that experience as it compares to this one, right? Like, what were you doing at Monzo? Hit us.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the journey at Monzo is a really interesting one. I ended up going to London to work when I didn't get a visa lottery in the States. My first job was in New York in digital marketing, kind of luck of the draw, first job rotation. I got put in an associate product management team, or in a team as an associate product manager. I was like, this is cool. I want to be in tech. I really want to build products and I want to work in this capacity, but I wanted to stay originally in New York and do that, and I couldn't, which was rough. Like you never. I think it's an interesting career transition when you have to do something when it doesn't come out of a choice or a failure on your part. It's just like luck of the draw. And so I went back home to Ecuador to kind of get my bearings, taught math for like 4 or 5 months, saved up some money, and then I decided to go to London. I was like, there's a good tech scene there. The tech scene in Latin America wasn't what it is today. And I started at a different job actually before Monzo. I started at a company called Appear Here. And the reason I touch on Appear Here is because there are a lot of overlaps with what we're building at Bags. It was a marketplace app. So we connected empty stores to small business owners, right? And people that needed a space for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever. Similar kind of crowd, right? We worked with a bunch of small business owners that were launching bakeries or clotheslines or whatever and wanted to bring their digital business to the physical world. And finally, because I started in sales, and that was a weird experience being a Latino kid really selling to British landlords. And the only way I got around that was learning how to code, and code specifically towards data engineering and data analytics. And that was really what kind of got me hooked onto the more tech side of things. I was like, okay, I see the value in data commercially. I see the value in data in terms of like what it can do for me personally. And that was something that like a thread that really carried forward, and it carries forward to what we do in Bags today, right? Like we think about data as the most important thing and one of the most, the biggest enablers, I guess in a positive way, enabler for businesses to do what they want, right? Like the more you know, the more information you have, the higher the leverage you have in negotiations and what kind of things you go for. And so, yeah, kind of to bring it back to Monzo finally, after doing a bit of data work at Appear Here and kind of getting those technical chops, I moved into a business analyst role at Monzo, which was half commercial / product stuff and half just like, what does the data tell us? what can we build on the data side? And I joined pretty early days. We were like, I think 160, 180 people, 250,000 prepaid users. So it was before Monzo was a bank. Um, and I think that what like it taught me from pretty much week one is like the strain of scale can be really, really, really intense.
Like intense from like a people perspective, from a mentality perspective, from like a mind, body, soul. What was it?
Yeah, I think mind, body, soul is the right way to put it. It's a mix of everything, right? Because like, what even is 250,000 anything, right? Like, so first you have to like deal with that, right? You're talking to 10 landlords a month or 100 businesses a month, and then all of a sudden you're looking at a database with 250,000 users, or even like take it a step lower, right? We're managing. My first kind of data optimization job was figuring out how to schedule our internal customer support team to best serve our customers. And dude, that was wild because we were just dealing with like thousands of hours, and you looked at it in chunks of 15 minutes. And that was even a skill I hadn't thought about before. Is like, how do you allocate capacity internally to just the number of messages coming in? And you just sit on the chat, and if you looked at that chat, that's something. It kind of gives you a different perspective of like how technology amplifies things. It's like you just saw chats roll in like a stream of consciousness, like that stuff didn't stop. And if you're Daniel Taylor and that's just like how your phone is off the hook all the time, it's one thing. But like a regular human, yeah, a regular human, it's just like you don't ever see that. So that was an interesting experience, and it was like just the first taster, because like we went from 250,000 to I think 5.3 million users when I left. I was there throughout like the week what we call the bankification project. I wasn't on the team that worked on it, but I saw that from like a third party perspective, and it was this really interesting process of like regulatory constraints and a whole different world of being a tech company in the finance world. And um, yeah, then kind of grew out into a scaling role, then a product role at Monzo, and then finally worked as chief of staff, which was a crash course in a bunch of things because it was during the pandemic. It was onboarding a new CEO. Um, and I think especially in those last 2 years, I got to work with people who I think like redefined what leadership was to me. Mm. Yeah, that's a great question because I think Monzo was always a place that was like super kind and super empathetic and super high performing, which was weird. Like that didn't exist for me, and I think it's what we want to create culturally at Bags. And it's the main reason I joined is I wanted to learn how to build a company like that. I think that the difference was before our kind of leaders were learning as they went, and this kind of second new age leadership group at Monzo already knew how to lead and how to and what to expect. And I think that's the kind of core difference is like tempering your expectations as a leader and knowing when to push, when to give room, when to increase your expectations of performance of the people around you. And then all because they'd already kind of been there, done that, certain things didn't phase them. And certain things just felt natural to them, like certain moments of stress or tension or whatever. And I think, yeah, it's when it's not your first rodeo, it's not your first crisis. You have a very different approach and a much more measured way of like still demanding performance from your team, but understanding that they can do it already, if that makes sense, because you've seen.
Without a doubt. And now you're seeing it on it from another angle, right? Being a co-founder, and you were, obviously very, very senior at Monzo, but um, I think leadership is such a core part of, especially when you get into the early days of being a founder and motivating people and, driving forward towards what seems like the light at the end of the tunnel. Um, but talk to us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, right? Because I mean, we started business together in college, right? This Bags hasn't necessarily been your first rodeo. Matter of fact, your road to Bags wasn't a straight line, right? Like, what's your story as a founder, a builder of businesses.
Yeah, for sure. So I think I can divide it in a few phases. Like, there's like the middle high school phase where I ran a fake Crocs business. That was my first venture. And like I call it a venture because it was a legit operation. I remember that was the time where Crocs came to Ecuador, right? And like Crocs go for like, I don't know, 50, $60 a piece at that time. And they were really bright colors and they were all the rage. And I went to an international school. So a few kids who had gone to the States came back with them and everyone wanted them. And I mentioned it to my dad at dinner, and he was like, "Oh, they're selling like a different a fake version of those in the like notorious fake goods market in Guayaquil that he had to go for research for his own stores." I was like, "Hey, can you bring me?" I had like a little bit of, I don't know, like birthday money, homework, like chores money, that kind of stuff. I had like $300. I remember. I was like, "How much do they cost?" And he said $15. I'm like, "Okay, can you bring me 20 pairs?" I just like went all in, and he brings me, he's like, "Sure, whatever, let's see where this takes." And like kudos to my dad, he like just supported that curiosity and brings me, I remember this blue duffel bag full of like all colors and sizes of Crocs. And like, write down all the size excels and then start selling them at like $30 a pop, right? So I'm making 100% margin on these things, and I was killing it. I'd never seen that much money in my life. And like everyone wanted them. I was a person, you wanted red, I got you. You wanted purple, I got you. And it got to the point where like the one of our teachers, I think it was our history teacher, calls me into his office and he's like, "Hey, Ignacio, I hear you're selling these Crocs." And I was like, "I'm gonna get expelled." I was like, I don't know if this, I didn't even know if it was breaking the rules. I was like, "I'm gonna get expelled." And he's like, "Do you have a size 10?" And I was like, yeah, yeah, I do. So like that was really interesting, and the only reason I stopped was because I think my parents realized it was kind of getting a little bit out of control. It was no longer like a project, and also like the legit Crocs was coming in, and it turned out that my aunt got the licensing for that. So there's an ethical.
You can't undercut family. That's like rule number one in the bylaws.
Exactly that. And yeah, and I think like what that taught me was just like sometimes you just gotta go for it. You just gotta try it out. And I never really considered myself a salesperson at all. Um, what I think got me psychologically there was like I'm just matching supply to demand. I'm not doing anything more. And it's like I wasn't pushing people to buy ever. And that was a really comforting thought because I'm not someone that like that's not my personality, I guess. That's not my sales technique, for lack of a better word. But yeah, so went from that. Obviously, at Brown, we got there. I like the entrepreneurial itch starts to crawl. You're like, how can we start a business? How can we have fun? How can we make money? We started, our events company there. I think even like how we ran the international scholarship committee was super lucrative as a business. I think we started that with probably $2,000, $3,000 in the bank going towards like matching scholarships, which was inconsequential. And by the time I finished kind of my run there, we had, I think, over 100K. And so that was like a cool experiment for me on how to take something and scale it and explode it just in terms of money. But I think the one thing I always struggled with was like coming to terms with making money for myself, which is a very, I think, kind of a privileged position to be in because uh, like, I never had issues with money growing up, right? Like, we never had exorbitant amounts, but we were always super comfortable. We always had a good education and whatever we needed, like, my parents were there for me. But so there was this psychological block around, like, how do you make money for yourself? And that was, I think, where I would go into the next stage of entrepreneurship because when I moved um, into like the workforce, all I could think about was I want to start a business. And I'm gonna be an entrepreneur like at whatever cost.
But man, I remember whenever I'd come to London for like, I think it was like 5 or 6 years, we would always get dinner and we'd sit down and go, all right, here's the idea we're currently working on. Here's the plan. Let's pull it apart, put it back together. We would, 3, 4, 5 hours. Um, so Was it that it was the right time for you to leave to start a business, the right circumstance, or was it just the right business for you to leave to start that drove you down the path towards, starting what was Rhonda?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because so the Rhonda was an idea that took, it's like a name that had like six ideas behind it, right? It was like pivots on pivots on pivots. I just loved the name for some reason, and I had the domain, and it was a .com. I was like, this is gonna be a business. And I think one thing that I wish I kind of had done a little bit differently was been a little bit more patient with it. Like, because while I was at Monzo, I was working 12, 14-hour days. And then I would get home and try like an Amazon drop shipping thing or whatever. And it was generally not money motivated because that's not my driver. It was like, I just wanted to work. I just want to win. I just wanted to like, I want to see the graph go up just for the sake of the graph going up.
Athlete, man. Athletes have that edge. We trying to win.
And it's just that. It's just like honestly performing in something that you have more control over. Because back to the Monzo point, when you have like 2,000 people at an organization, and even when you manage a product, even if you have ownership of an area, you're still part of such a big organism that you don't know, like, wait, we got 5 million users. Did I do anything? Did I not? And so I think that's the perspective there. So yeah, I wish I'd kind of waited and just like learned as much as possible. Because Rhonda, when the reason I left to start Rhonda was I tried 3 or 4 different ideas with 3 or 4 different partners, and I had a mix of elements. One was I had a set of principles for the kind of business I wanted to build. I had a problem I wanted to solve super concretely, which was access to entrepreneurship and access to capital for Latin American entrepreneurs. And I was in a personal space where I had plateaued in my learning at Monzo, in a way that I felt like I would have to really push through to break that. Plus, I think another piece that is usually not talked about in these journeys or entrepreneurial circles is like, I miss my family. I miss my friends side of the world. I miss being closer to home. And the pandemic really brought that out, especially through like a couple of health things. You just realize what's really important to you. So I think those values, those principles, those kind of like frameworks were all falling into place to like, now is the moment. Why not try it? And that was yeah. So I went out to start Ronda, which was a business to make creators entrepreneurs, pretty much focused on Latin American creators. That's when I met you and Will. Well, you and Will as a couple, not you and Will separately.
And we dating 100%. Actually, we're married at this point. I think we're all married at this point.
Yeah, agreed. And I think what drove me to like really want to work on what was AMP and is now Bags with the two of you was it was always really easy to communicate with each other, because we care so deeply about the same things. We're like, we care about helping other entrepreneurs succeed. We care about changing a system that we think is pretty messed up. And how we do that isn't that important to us as long as the like the values are there and we like get the impact that we want to do. And so to me, I was like, I know I've seen how hard it is to build a business through all of the experiences before, and especially like a startup with Monzo. And I think what I was optimizing for there is like, are we going to build something cool with high impact? Probably. Am I going to enjoy the ride because I'm working with like good people whose values align with mine and like I actually want to be talking to every day? 100%. And so I think those were the kind of pieces that added into the journey that was like co-founding Bags, which is honestly my favorite thing I've worked on ever.
Yeah, I echo that. That's for sure. But here's the thing: you left what could be seen as equity on the table, right? Like you were a founder with a couple teammates, right? Own majority of your business, and just set the stage, right? And then you come here and we've got two founders already. We've raised some money, and you technically took an equity, what could be seen as an equity haircut, right? Like, um, and I get this question from founders all the time around, starting a business with somebody versus, how do you share and divvy up the pie? How do you, right? Like, how did you think about that decision? And how should founders be thinking about that decision when, thinking about what it really takes and the team it really requires to build a business and sort of that pie of equity, right? Like that value that sits and supports a business.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think for me, and I know I keep saying it's a really good question, but you are firing really good ones. When it comes to my thought process around equity, I think there are two or maybe three kind of key frameworks I anchored back to. One was basically equity is nothing until it's something. And that's like a really liberating thought, right? Like, right, I had 4 years of options at Monzo. Awesome. If that becomes something 1 year, amazing. If not, my time there was still worth it. I got a livable salary. I learned more than I could hope to learn at any job. And I made friends for life. Plus, I built some really cool things. So that to me is like, without the equity, would that experience be worth it? 100%. Cool. So I had, and then also, I had still equity to vest, and I would have probably gotten more equity bonuses down the line. So I'd already know, like, I knew the feeling of giving out of equity, and I had zero regrets on like, okay, my cycle there is closed, done. I think that's one piece. Then the other framework for me is just like, do you want a smaller piece of a bigger pie? Which is a very like more, it's a more commercial and tactical way of looking at it. And I was like, do I think I can build something bigger than our vision at Bags with what my vision for Ronda was back then? I was like, no, I don't. And I was very honest with myself about that. Do I think we can build something massive at Bags? Yeah, 100%. And so that was like a no brainer. And then I think the third kind of piece is what you actually value. And I know that entrepreneurship is a super lonely journey for most people. And it has been at moments for all of us, right? But I think what the difference with partnering with someone and finding co-founders that like you don't have to be best friends like we are, right? Like you don't have to do that, but like founders that you can trust and then understand you as a human and respect you, that means that you have like you value that connection and that support more than you do the like potential cash in the future. And I know for me, like, I'd been burnt out in the past. I struggled with like pretty aggressive mental health stuff that was connected or stemmed to work. And now I don't because I know like if I have a day where I need to just like take to myself, I text you and William, or honestly, anyone on the team, and I feel like my back is covered. And not because I'm a co-founder, but because we all care for and respect and take care of each other. So I think um, it to me it's like I my theme of the year is process and patience, and so like if you can find a way to enjoy the process more, optimize for that. I don't think like if you put, I guess like the best way to frame it would be like how much, like what's the price of your friendship, and you can't really put a number on that. What's the price of your partnership? If it's a good one, nothing. Like there's no you there's it's just impossible to compare. So yeah, equity haircuts all day if you find good partners to build cool things with.
Yeah, man. No, I second that. And in reality, I think finding people that you really trust at your core makes the entirety of the process easier, right? Like there's so much there. There's so many other things that we need to fight through, right, as founders to build anything. But at least if you can find the right individuals to fight with you, then you might get really even closer to getting towards the end goal of starting that business. So a couple more questions because I especially for entrepreneurs and founders who are thinking about building a product or in the honestly the early stages of building a product, right? Like you're that product mind within our org. Um, in the early days,
how do you think people should be prioritizing, you know, their time and prioritizing how they build that first product? Like what advice would you give, whether it's a founder who's building the product themselves or, and right, like product can mean a lot of different things, obviously, service, a good tech platform.
For advice, the first thing is like really trim down to what the minimum viable version is as quickly as possible. Right? Like just get someone to pay you something for that service or product as early and quickly as possible. If you found one person to do that, you will find more people to do that.
Yep.
And you can adjust your pricing later. You can like figure out your messaging later. You can redo the brand 12 times. Like we've done ours 3 times, right? Like there's no, I think it's easy to get caught up in like procrastinating with busy work and being brutally honest with yourself about what's actually moving the needle and what is just distracting you from the things that you're afraid of is the most powerful thing you can do. Right? Like, that's how we got to our model, right? We anchored down to the one place where we saw real revenue.
Yep.
And you know, we've kind of come up and down on revenue in different months and things along those lines, but we know that the model exists and that we can replicate it.
Yeah.
And we're refining and moving forward with that all the time. So I think that's the main thing. I think there's also something kind of magical about like that first payment.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like, holy shit, I just made $10 online. How? I don't know, but now I get to like replicate that. I think that's the first piece of advice. I think the second one is like changing the definition of what you think of as a product, which is where we started the conversation.
Absolutely.
Where like, you know, the product is more than the product. The product is the experience, and it's the language you use, and it's the marketing behind it, and it's the storytelling. It's everything from your customer service to the box that something comes in, right? Like those are the memorable things about a product. And it doesn't mean that everything has to be perfect, but I think it means that you have to be aware of where those imperfections lie in that whole experience so that you can pull the lever on what you think can be improved.
Yeah.
I think that's it. And then the third piece is which I've struggled with a lot throughout my entrepreneurial journeys. Like, don't be afraid to give your whatever you're doing the right value and the value it deserves. And I think that's really tough.
With that, I mean, we'll talk to that a little bit within the lens of like being a Latino or Black or, you know, women, you know, female founder, right? Like talk to me about, because I often find we tend to have a habit of undervaluing ourselves, period. Right?
Totally. No, I could start from obviously I'm not a woman, but one thing I did at Monzo was interview a lot of people and hire a lot of people. And you know, you read all of these things on like men negotiate more and things like that. And even though we had frameworks, every single time, almost without an exception, I think one exception, the men would negotiate much more than women. Much more. Like, shit, this is crazy. And it's real. Thankfully, we had frameworks to like mitigate against that in terms of our negotiation and stuff that we've adopted into Bags, which is cool. But I think that was like my first kind of eye opener. And when I've like coached a few people in negotiating their salaries, especially women, I'm just like, look, what's your number? And I had a friend who was going to ask very concretely $75K for a role. I was like, no, you're just not. You're going to ask for 105. 30K more, a little bit over 35% above what you're asking. And she's like, why? And I was like, because when someone gets to the point of wanting to hire you, there are very few things they won't do to get you, especially if it's like a profitable company. And so she did. She asked.
Good people. And when you do, guess what? They're going to write the check. Yep.
Exactly. Long story short, she got that salary. And she just like pretty candidly was like, I don't know if it was like what it was, but I would have never pushed myself to. And I see this like repeating. And then kind of, I guess, to the point of being a Latino or a Black founder, because I know we've talked about this a bit, is I think culturally we just like come from families, countries, cultures of frugality, right? Like you want to save, you want to get the deal, you want to get 10% discount, you're going to negotiate everything. And like my heritage is Lebanese, and like one thing we take pride in is negotiating every price, which like sometimes it's a fun exercise, but sometimes I think it comes from a mentality of like, I don't have enough, so I need to bring the value down. And so then as an entrepreneur, all of a sudden you're like, in order to get a sale, I need to give a discount. Or in order to, you know, get myself off the ground, I need to charge less than what my work is worth. And it's really hard. And I think the way that you do that is like two things: is anchor yourself to the data as much as possible, right? Like do the research. What is your salary? What is your price? Like what are your competitors charging for it? Is your thing objectively better or worse? Like be honest with yourself. Don't get emotionally attached. And the second one is asking people you care about, and then asking your customers, right? I think that there's a framework that's really cool for pricing around 4 questions. It's like, what's so low you wouldn't trust it? What's so high that you would never even consider it? And so that gives like your customer a range. And then you're like, okay, what's high, but you would go for it, right? Like it's high, but you would go for it. And they'll give you a price point in that range. And then you're like, okay, and what's like comfortable for you? So let's say the range is like 10, 100, 80, and 50. Now you know that your price point is between 50 and 80. And this isn't like you placing it. It's your customer telling you this is what this is worth to me. So then you go and figure out like, how do I make my costs manageable so that I can sell this at 50 to 80 bucks. But yeah, it's really tough. And I think what changed, or what I'm learning is it's not always about like how much money you can save. It's about seeing the kind of relative, for most people, it's an infinite potential upside in this modern day and age, right? Like there's no limit to the amount of money you can make. Whether you will or you won't, it's based on luck, it's based on a million things, but the upside is infinite and it's there.
I love that framework. Yeah, we're gonna chat more about that framework later. There's a lot that we can do and dabble within that, but I think that's a super actionable piece of final advice. Well, Ignacio, thank you so much for joining us for today's Bodega session, where we chat through everything from your journey to how we should be thinking about product, to the importance of data, to valuing yourself, right? And valuing what you're bringing to the market as a founder. And I think that's key. But thank you, man. We will see you back on the Bodega cast.
So yeah, I hope.
Oh yeah, very soon. Very soon. This will be hopefully one of many. But I appreciate you, dude, and thank you.
Appreciate you too, brother. Abrazo. Bye.